Members, Texas taxpayers know the truth. Property taxes are rising too fast. The problem is, in a nutshell, as appraised values rise, tax rates do not come down enough to provide property tax relief. The Interim Select Committee on Property Tax Reform Relief went to 7 cities, took 50 hours of testimony, 321 witnesses, interacted with 2,150 attendees, and heard from hard-pressed taxpayers around the state afraid of being taxed out of their home or business by ever-rising property tax bills. Texas already has the 5th highest property tax rate in the United States, and I, for one, don't want to continue to climb the ladder above states like Illinois and New York. When the interim committee made its 7-city tour, 7 of us heard the stories constantly around the state. I want to thank Senators Creighton, Senator Van Taylor, Senator Hancock, Senator Lucio, Senator Uristi, and Senator Hancock, and Senator Perry for their 50 hours of public testimony with as many witnesses listening to taxpayers and elected officials around the state. Given the magnitude of property tax increases, we need real reform now. Homeowners pay in many cases 8, 9, 10% more a year, and many commercial property owners are paying 15 to 20% more per year, year after year. The Texas Taxpayers and Research Association has calculated the median average home property tax bill.
Excuse me. Members, a couple of our members have asked for order. It's a little noisy. Thank you.
The Texas Taxpayers and Research Association has calculated a median property tax increase on the average Texas home of 33.7%, over a third increase in 5 years from 2010 to 2015. And the testimony we took around the state is quite telling. When we went to Brownsville, members, we saw that the $10,000 homestead exemption approved on your bill, Senator Nelson, last year, actually made an overall property tax cut in the valley. That $126 on the school side actually had a cut for property tax bills in the city of Brownsville and many of the towns in the valley that don't have the property values that the rest of the state does. When we discussed it in the valley, the Libre initiative made what I think was one of the best quotes of the 50 hours of testimony. They said, as taxes increase on low-income families, they become more dependent on government. Then we went to the other side of the spectrum. We went to Senator Taylor will remember this, one of the largest petrochemical companies in the state. They had a choice to put a $2 billion chemical plant in either Texas, Louisiana, or Canada. After looking at just the tax situation, the property tax situation specifically, they testified on the record that they made the decision to take the $2 billion plant and all the jobs with it to Louisiana. When you have both taxpayers in the neediest of portion of society, as well as the largest taxpayers in the state, having problems with property tax relief, we need action now. In some cases, we've had some severe problems with appraisal districts around the state. In Lubbock, Senator Perry, you can remember the gentleman that drove 6.5 hours one way to the hearing. And when he drove to the hearing, he was fueled by something that happened in his ARB hearing, Mr. President. He was sitting in there trying to get his ag exemption restored on his farm. And every farmer knows that if you lose your ag exemption on your farm, it's a catastrophe. And in the middle of the hearing, the ARB chairman turned to the chief appraiser of the county and asked him a simple question. Would you help, can we help this taxpayer? The chief appraiser said no. And immediately the appraisal review board voted to not to restore his ag exemption, which is just collusion right in front of a taxpayer. It made him drive 13 hours that way, wait 4 hours to testify because of what he saw at a hearing. Another taxpayer asked a question at an urban area and was asking questions about a problem with his business personal property account. He ended up having his phone slapped out of his hand, and before he knew it, he was in handcuffs against a glass wall. I think it was at the time Senator Huffman said that the system had obviously become too adversarial. because when HPD was called to the scene because the security guard in question, who was private, used an assault code, they watched the tape and immediately recommended that he be released, Senator Watson. So without legal representation, I thought that was a pretty good, day for a taxpayer. But Doc Anderson went home, that night, but his story remains. We've seen everything on the committee where appraisal review boards, all on their own, decided that they needed a unanimous consent. Senator Creighton, you remember this testimony, that they wouldn't reduce land values unless they had a 3-0 vote. There's nothing in the code that says that, but yet that was a common practice in the largest appraisal district of the state. We've had other problems that included a major appraisal district who had a strike list for arbitrators, Senator West. They would, if the arbitrator ruled for the district, they struck them and put them on a list. And so it was one strike and you're out. Not even 3 strikes, just one. And those arbitrators would never get another case at that district. When you see these type of problems, we realize that not only do we need property tax reform relief, but we need appraisal reform as well. This is what SB 2 does. It reduces the rollback rate from 8% to 5%. The rate was set back in 5% in 1979 in a low inflationary period, and what we're doing is rolling back that rate back to its initial setting. The 8% improvement, and I know Senator Hancock knows because he spent so much time, is really not an 8% limit because you get the value of new improvements. And then you get the 8% plus new improvements plus the value of first-time homestead exemptions. And then it goes on and on. So an 8% number really, it limits government to a 12, 13, or 14% growth on a yearly basis. And that's just flat unsustainable for taxpayers. The taxpayers do not have the ability to pay to keep up with that growth of government. What the 5% bill do was lower that back down to hopefully single digits, where that's where the growth of government can be sustained because it simply is impossible to do so. And we have urban counties, members, that we've taken testimony on, and cities that have a 35% increase in their property tax levies in 3 years. That's almost 12% a year. And again, that's simply unsustainable. Now, what happens if we exceed the new lower rollback rate? Well, there's an automatic election. Right now that exists for school districts in form because when school districts need to go to their copper pennies, they have a chance to do a taxpayer ratification election. We're bringing that to all the other taxing jurisdictions because right now we have a cumbersome petition process that would eventually lead in major urban counties to filling up Reliance Stadium twice with 150,000 signatures in 90 days, or Jerry Jones's World once in 90 days, to be able to get a petition by the public. If there is an issue, the public has the ultimate local control of voting on their own tax rates. Now, I want to mention something that we've forgotten in modern days. We've forgotten the value of compounding. The value of compounding used to be something that people knew because when they were kids, they would get a passbook savings account, and there would be an 8% increase or a 7% interest rate a year. Of course, in the modern day, in almost a zero interest rate economy, that doesn't occur. The Texas Taxpayer and Research Association, I mentioned earlier, has calculated that the average home is paying roughly about $4,500 on taxes at this point. If that would continue to increase at 9% a year for 8 years, that home's tax bill doubles. But that's not the only problem, okay? What happens if it continues another 8 years? Well, then it quadruples. So we see that tax bill go from $4,500 to $9,000 to $18,000. And we have jurisdictions and places in Texas where we're on that path right now. What a 5% rollback rate, or just let's say we take the example of that home and we could reduce that to 5% increase, it would mean that it would push out that doubling to 14.4 years or for a quadrupling of taxes, 29 years. You see, we're buying time for the taxpayers to keep up with these incredible payment increases by lowering the rollback rate and controlling the rate of growth on all 4,000 taxing units in the state. Now, are we throwing stones from a glass house, Senator Kolkhorst? Well, last time I checked, the budget that we passed last biennium had a 3.8% increase in general revenue and general dedicated revenue over 2 years. With this budget that we're looking at this year, may be an actual reduction. What we're talking about is lowering the rate of growth on taxing jurisdictions so that hard-pressed homeowners and small business owners especially can stay in their home and business by lowering the rollback rate and controlling the rate of growth. A final point. We relabeled what was very difficult language for the public to understand. It's called the effective tax rate. We are calling it the no new taxes rate because that's really what it is. We hope that's a signal to all the taxing jurisdictions that that's the rate we would hope folks would adopt for their taxpayers in their district. In addition, we're going to continue the role of the committee. The committee did a yeoman's work around the state, and the comptroller has agreed to house a property tax advisory board that will take a look at best practices at appraisal districts around the state, as well as taxpayer complaints. And they'll do that in the interim, in between sessions. And also, we have a prescribed notice that actually in plain English will tell folks how much their taxes are up. See, right now the notice doesn't even say how much an individual taxpayer's taxes are up, and they don't compare back to last year. So the notice requirement is very important. Now, of all the testimony we took, there's 4 people I want to highlight because it happened in Arlington, and it happened with the first 4 taxpayers we listened to that morning. There was a county judge who came who said that he didn't want to support SB 2 because he was worried about the cost of a rollback election. And even though when we discussed the fact that he had a 50% increase in tax levies in 5 years, he didn't consider that a tax increase. I want to point out, members, that in SB 2, we've used the automatic election date of November because that's the lowest cost place for the taxpayers and taxing jurisdictions to have an election. Senator Van Taylor, in November, when all they have to do is add 1 line to the existing their existing computer programs for a rollback or a tax rate ratification election. The second witness was very elegant. She was over 65. And Senator Nichols, she was spending 10% of her personal income on taxes. She was being taxed out of her home because her last raise that she got was 29 cents an hour. And she was already at her wit's end, which is why she came to the committee, because she knew that in the Dallas-Fort Worth area at the time of the Arlington hearing and what's now actually shown up in tax bills in Dallas-Fort Worth and Tarrant and Dallas County, was that there was a 22 to 24% increase coming. And even though her school taxes were frozen, her other approximately 47% of her bill was not frozen. The third person, Mr. President, was a veteran who was disabled. He owned his home free and clear from 2000, but he realized that even a free and clear title, he was renting from the government because his tax bill was going up so much faster than his income due to a circumstance that he thought that he was having an effective rental agreement with the government. And the fourth witness was our president, Lieutenant Governor Patrick, who, after hearing the plight of the taxpayers, said, you don't have the luxury of taking people's money and then pricing them out of their home. You just don't. Members, homeowners can't afford the increases at this point. Neither can businesses. I want to thank Bexar County Democrat Party Chairman Manuel Medina, who endorsed SB 2, and Harris County Republican Party that did also, because this is not a partisan issue. This is an everybody pays issue. And the governor last night tweeted his support of SB 2 and the many organizations that include, and not limited to, Texas Association of Realtors, Texas Taxpayer and Research Association, Texas Small Business Association, Texas Association of Manufacturers, Texas Oil and Gas Association, Texas Building Owners and Managers Association, Texas Chemical, just to name a few. Members, I urge your support and adoption of Senate Bill 2.